all heard the story of the woman at the well. Undoubtedly, you've listened to sermons on this story from virtually every angle imaginable. Today, however, we're going to explore the story more from the perspective of the well. And this takes us to John 4. And sometimes, when you're going to look at something, it's nice to kind of get an overview, get some topography, if you will, see what the terrain looks like. So, verse 4 says that, when therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself baptized not, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again unto Galilee, and he must needs go through Samaria. Then he cometh to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And then we're going to start looking at the well. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water, and Jesus said unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away into the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. And Jesus answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith unto thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman said unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? And Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. Now, Sychar, Samaria is a place. The underlying meaning of the word is not, in my opinion, particularly significant, but it's also known as Sychar, which is really the idea of combining two words, intoxicant and drunkard. Okay? So it sounds kind of like a rowdy sort of place, right? Not necessarily a great spot. And then I want to look at the verses here. Verse 6, it says, Jesus sat on the well. And the idea here is that the well is like a fountain bubbling up and whatnot. It's something that's been constructed there, the water's bubbling out of. So you can kind of see him sitting on the edge of the well or whatever it might be. And then in verse 11, and we'll go over these verse by verse a little bit, but in verse 11, she talks about the well is deep. And the word she uses there is the idea of a pit or a cistern or a prison. And then verse 12, Jacob gave us this well, and again she uses the word pit, cistern, or prison. And Jesus says, the water I give shall be a well, and he uses the word fountain again, the idea of this fountain. So right off the bat, you can see they have a little different view of their conversation, right? That's the first thing we see. And it brings me to communicating and dwim. You all know what dwim means, right? No? I will. It's the number one problem in communication. Dwim means do what I mean. Okay? And that's how we have problems to begin with in our communications. Do what I mean. I did what you said. No, you didn't do what I said. You didn't do what I meant. I'm really upset about it. Well, you didn't say that. Well, yes, I thought I did, and so we don't communicate because what we really want people to do is what we mean, and we don't always speak plainly enough that they understand what I meant. Does that make sense? So right off the bat, anytime you have a problem with communication, you have to look at dwim. Am I having a dwim problem? The second thing is you say tomato, I say tomato, whatever. We can use the same words, but they don't always have the same meaning, as we demonstrated with the word well here. Or, as I've said before, if your wife ever says to you something is fine, you are in big trouble, and you better get some kind of further interpretation because you may not mean what you think it means, right? Not good. Spelled the same, sounds the same, looks the same, has totally different meaning. And that can happen sometimes in church. Do you know that? The pastor can say something, heard from God, spoke a word, crystal clear, but what you heard is something completely different, right? I think in most churches, the number one word that gets all messed up that way is the word tithe. It's a tenth. It's in the Bible. We're supposed to do it. But when the pastor says tithe, we instantly start thinking, he just wants my money. He doesn't understand. He's not interested in spiritual things at all. You know, we get lost, right? Simple word, but we have a different interpretation of it. And then we have spiritual misunderstanding. We just don't get it. Seems crystal clear. Turns out it's not. And my dad used to say it's important that we have an understanding so that we don't have a misunderstanding. And those are very true words. And spiritually, we need to hear from God. We need to get things right from God, with God. Talking to Him, prayer's good. His word's good. And then we need to understand that God puts pastors, leaders in place to help shepherd us because we're a little bit dumb like sheep. And sometimes we can think, well, this must be what God means. But if you don't really know, maybe you should ask. And you can ask your pastor, Pastor, this is what I think I'm hearing. What do you think? Would you be embarrassed to do that? You shouldn't be. That's his role, right? That's the pastor's role. One of several, but that's to help the sheep, right? See, communicating, it's not that difficult, but we sure make it that way. Because our thoughts drive what we hear, right? Our thoughts drive what we hear. And you can evidence that by the game telephone, right? You tell someone, they tell someone, pretty soon it's a completely different story. That's because each person hears it with their own thoughts. They don't repeat it word for word. We're not little tape recorders. I mean, maybe when we're really little we might be, but we're not really tape recorders. Everything's run through the filter of right up here. How do I think about what's being said? And then I come to my own conclusions. I add my own stuff, right? Deborah, this is really difficult. And Deborah says, Randy, it's impossible. And Randy says, Pat, you shouldn't even try. Right? I mean, what? Where did we go? Right? But it's all through what's in here, what's going on in here. And that's why it's important we take every thought captive. Because the enemy of your soul wants to confuse your mind so that you come to the wrong conclusion about what's actually being said. It started in the garden. You'll not surely die. You misunderstood what God said. Created that confusion. And we do it to ourselves, right? We've talked about that a little bit. You rehearse scenarios in your head about things that you're trying to deal with, and most of the time what you rehearse isn't even close to what actually happens. And you are fully prepared for whatever you think is going to happen and totally unprepared for what actually does happen. Right? I mean, just, did any of you ever get any phone calls from robocalls? You know, I sometimes drive my wife nuts because most of the time I just get really frustrated by the fact that they interrupted my train of thought or whatever, and I block the call, and that's the end of it. But occasionally I like to just screw with them a little bit. I like to see if I can figure out what the AI can't respond to. And then, you know, a few weeks later, it responds to that. So they've they've upgraded. Like, hey, we got to fix this. You know, just takes them off and confuses them all the way down the line. But see, it's because somebody somewhere is trying to figure out what's the possible answers here. You know, one of my favorites is, you know, they come on there and they say, you know, we're calling from accident claims, blah, blah, blah. And I go ahead with your credit card. I'm having trouble hearing you. Go ahead with your credit card. Hold on, let me get someone for you. Then the real person comes on. I go ahead with your credit card. And they go, what? So go ahead with your credit card. What do you mean? Well, you're wasting my time. I get paid for my time, so go ahead with your credit card number. And then they hang up. But anyway, just how it goes. So communication is what's going on here, right? So I want you to look at this. So he's sitting on the well, the fountain. I'm assuming not on the water. He's sitting on the edge of the fountain there. And he says, give me to drink. And her response is, you know, what are you talking to me for? You know, we don't even get along as people, right? And he says unto her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that said to you to give me to drink, you would have asked of me or of him, and I would give you living water. She's in the moment. I'm here to get water. You've heard the stories of, you know, why would she be there at that time of day? Which, by the way, times of day in the Bible, this is free. I'll throw it in, no charge, okay? This says it was about the 6th hour. So what time is that? What time? 3? What did you say? Noon, okay. Anybody else? I think most people would tell you it's about noon. And it's based on the beginning of the day being at sunrise, which is about 6. So 6 hours would be about noon. Although if you actually count it out correctly, 6, if that's when you're using a sunrise, 6 would actually be the 1st hour, which means that the 6th hour would be sometime between 11 and 11:59. Does that make sense? Well, just if 6 is 1, 7 would be 2, right? Okay. All right. But here's the thing. Most of the time in the Bible, because sunrise varies, have you noticed that the sun doesn't always come up at exactly the same time? Particularly this time of year, that's pretty evident, right? But because of that, you can simply do this. If you take 6 and say that's going to be uh, sometime in the mid to late morning, 3 being sometime in the morning, 9 being later in the day, and the 12th hour being towards night, right? If you just take them into those groups, it kind of gives you a rough idea. So this is about the middle of the day, okay? She's there to get water. He asks her for water, and she says, "You know what? We don't even talk. What's the deal with that?" And he comes up with this: "If you knew, you would ask, and I would give you living water." And at this point, they're not talking about the same thing at all, right? And she said, "How is that even possible? You have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep." See, in her world, the well and what he's talking about, and living water and all that, is not even on the map. Everything is difficult. Her life is difficult. Her life is like a prison. This well is not some place that she's going to with the joy and happiness in her heart. She's going in the middle of the day. Her life has kind of created a scenario where it's not even, she hates going to the well, right? You ever been that place in your life where just, it's like it's a drudgery, everything you do, right? Really? I mean, I don't imagine that everyone wakes up and says, "Oh, goody, I'm going to work." Not everybody. Or, "Oh, joy, I have classes at college today." Or, whatever it might be, right? "Oh, goody, I get to go to Costco and shop." There are those who think it's fun. This is true. But not everybody. So this is kind of where her head's at. It's like, this is impossible. You can't even get anything out of here. I mean, living water, you can't even get a cup of water. What are you talking about? And there are times when God will speak something to your heart, but you just sit there and you think it's impossible. There's no way. That can't happen. What are you talking about, God? Have you seen my checking account? Have you ridden in my car lately? Right? Have you met my crazy neighbor? Her head's someplace completely different. And then she says, who do you think you are? Are you greater than Jacob, who built this well, gave it to us? What is your problem? I've told the story on myself before, but I used to have this real problem when vehicles didn't work correctly. I would just lose my mind. And I spent all this money, custom built a motor, did all this work and everything. And we were going to go on vacation and tow a travel trailer to Montana. And it was in the summer and it was hot. And I had one thing left to do before I left, and that was I needed to get the exhaust repaired. So I went and I had a brand new exhaust put on the truck. Problem solved. So we took off for Montana, and the truck kept vapor locking. It was having problems. It was like the fuel would vapor lock, and I was trying to figure out what was going on. And so we stopped in Idaho, visited a relative, and then we were headed on into Montana. It was in the evening, although it was still hot. And we started up over the Continental Divide. And the truck vapor locked and stopped on a blind curve with a 25-foot travel trailer behind it. And I tried to roll back and get the trailer closer to the bank, but power steering, power brakes, and steep incline, and all I did was make it worse. And so I was there very frustrated, kind of losing my mind. And my wife said, we should pray. I said, I'll tell you what, you pray, I'm going to do something that makes a difference. So she said this really deep, deep prayer like, oh God, your children need help. Your truck is broke down. Send us some help. And a few minutes later, a guy stopped, smoking a cigarette, going the other way, walks up and goes, can I help you? No, I got it. He goes, well, what's wrong? Well, I wasn't in the mood, you know? Yeah, it's thinking I'm up anyway. And so, you know, he's like, well, why don't you hop in and try it? Let me see. He goes, I'll blow some air into the tank and see if that solves the problem. So he puts out his cigarette and he goes over and I get in and turn it and he blows into the gas tank and it fires up and it's just vapor locked. You're gonna need to get that fixed. Done. Down the road he goes, right? And we went on over the hill. My wife says he was an angel. I said angels don't smoke. And she said, well, he's not smoking now because when the gas splashed on him, he would be a torch. So you never know. But see, we can have these aha moments when suddenly it becomes very clear what's going on. I didn't communicate very well with him, but he was persistent in solving my problem because God had sent him to take care of my wife's prayer in spite of my attitude. Okay? We have those aha moments. Hey, I get it. I know what's going on now. And so Jesus said to her, whoever drinks of this water is going to drink again, but whosoever drinks of the water I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. What the water I'm going to give him is going to do is going to be a fountain within your soul, and it's going to keep giving you life. Why? Because God is the source of life, and that fountain is going to keep springing up over and over. When we let God give us a well. When we let God put a fountain within us. Instead of relying on my ancestors, instead of relying on my wisdom, instead of relying on my political views, instead of relying on all of these different things that we tend to go rely on instead of God. But it starts with a question. He says, give me to drink. We have to give him control. We have to give him our life. We have to give him the little dab of well that we have already so that he can turn it into something that never runs out. And I don't know, in the last few years, I've gotten frustrated when I hear people talk about how much it costs you to serve God. It costs you nothing. It costs you everything, but everything you have is nothing. You're making yourself way too important. God, I had to give you my life. I had to give you some of my money. I had to give you my attitude. I had to stay away from some people who were a bad influence in my life and stop doing this and that, stop doing that because it was going to kill me. Man, that's a lot. You know? He's like, I got this Lamborghini over here. Could you give me your broke down 58 Volkswagen? We got to communicate. We're talking tomato. God's talking tomato, right? We're talking a little dab, and he's talking about a fountain that overflows and benefits those around you. Are you looking at yourself? Or are you looking at the whole picture? What's the well that's within you? Is it a pit? A prison? For most of us, before we come to Christ, that's what we have, is we have a prison. Okay, you give me your prison, I'll give you joy. You give me your captivity, and I'll give you freedom. It's trading with God. His well for your well. Well, I like his better. I like the fountain. I don't like the prison. I want to see his spirit bubbling up. And the source of that bubbling up is him. Not my job, not my bank account, not my vehicles, not my relationships, none of that. It's him providing the joy. And it says the joy of the Lord will be my strength. The joy of the Lord will be my strength. My joy will be my strength. No. The joy of the Lord will be my strength. And it begins when we just give him what we have so that he can turn it into what we need. I give you my life, and I receive a fountain that wells up within and gives me joy and strength and peace. And as soon as I don't have those things, I need to go, whoop, time out, got to go to the well. Right? Got to return, let the fountain, maybe I've got some debris in the way. I need to get that out of the way and let that fountain begin to flow again. Does that make sense? So this is part 1 of a 2-part message, and we'll finish it next week.